Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of FireDEV, Fireside Chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Veda Cruz. Veda, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
So, you work for Gearbox Entertainment. For a lot of the listeners, they all, recognize the name Gearbox, from titles like Borderlands, Brothers in Arms, Homeworld. For me, like the original ones were like Homeworld and Brothers in Arms. Those are the games I remember. And then later on playing Borderlands. And obviously, it's a video games company. But what do you do there? Because it's a little different to what people usually think when you hear that somebody works for a gaming company.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the times when you think about a game company or just video games in general, you might be thinking about the more creative sides of it. So we're thinking about the art that you see on the screen, the audio, the score that you hear in the game that makes you feel some type of way. But behind all of that beautiful creativity and creation and development of the game is going to be some level of business that has to be at play in order to actually sell the game and profit off of it and make sure the operations are running smoothly. And so what I do at Gearbox is that I'm on the legal team. I am corporate counsel, so that's a lawyer. And as lawyer, I'm reviewing contracts to make sure that the devs have the licenses that they need to do, to use the programs that they want to use. Making sure that the contracts that we have with our suppliers, our vendors, and any other companies that we may work with are good and they're good and work for both parties. I also do privacy work, making sure that our games are compliant with the various privacy laws, not only around the US, but around the world. Besides privacy, I also deal with asset reviews, which is all the cool creative stuff that the devs do make, do end up many times at legal's desk in order to vet them and make sure that there's no issues, either infringing or inappropriate or something else that might cause a stir. And also working on the publishing arm. So, uh, Gearbox is interesting because we are both a developer and a publisher. On the development side, we've developed, those games that you mentioned, like Borderlands. And so with that kind of work, it is different than the kind of work I do for Gearbox Publishing. Gearbox Publishing has titles that we've published, such as Risk of Rain, Homeworld, like you mentioned. And although we've acquired some of those properties now, we did start off by publishing them. So it's always a really fun time to be working on providing a support role for the devs in a way that they probably don't want to be worried about the contracts or the licenses or the legalese or like whatever other, legal or business issues. They just want to focus on the creation of the game. And that's why it's so important to have support roles like legal and HR and finance and all the other ones to help them focus on what they need to focus on, and we take care of the rest.
Okay, so you mentioned that you, you one of the things that you take care of is making sure that the artist or the program, basically the creative side doesn't use, let's say, the piece of software or tool that they, shouldn't do. Has there ever been a scenario where they've used it, but not only used it, they've been using it for a while and they've done a fair bit of work with it, especially if it's, asset based, maybe they're making some sort of animations or, sprites or images and they made because if they made one image, it's not the end of the world. But let's say if they made, I don't know, 6 months worth of work, but then, you say, you can't use that tool. And has there ever been a situation like that, and how have you navigated it?
Exactly how you described, not to my knowledge, and that's a big part of it, not to my knowledge, because sometimes that may very well be happening and I just never catch wind of it. It's hard to keep track of every single tool that every single devs uses in the course of the day when you have over 500 employees at the company. Of course, but of course we do our best. And I think the important part is creating a culture of the devs wanting to come to business and legal to ask them these kinds of questions, especially for the legal questions. I'm really happy that ever since I started working at Gearbox at the very beginning, there may have been some feeling of a silo where like devs are in their lane, legal is in their lane, and there isn't much communication. But I worked really hard to make sure that they knew that it was safe and okay to come to legal, and we're not going to bite their head off and we're not going to chew them out. We're just trying to find a way to keep the company protected, because if the company isn't protected, then their job isn't protected, and then what's the point? Right. So, although that specific instance hasn't happened before, typically what might happen is that I can only assume that we would probably go ahead and try and seek the license afterwards, and maybe we'd have to pay more for it because we're in a worse negotiating position because we had already been using it, for example. Um but that's what I think would how it would actually play out. I think the scenario to really avoid, and this is important for lawyers and business folks to understand, but like the scenario we really want to avoid is that all those months of work and all of the money from the budget that was spent on those people hours and on the development of that part of the game would be for nothing. That is like a worst case scenario. And having to cut that content from the game is even worse, in my opinion. So we would love to avoid a scenario where that happens, which is why we would get the license in place in the first place, do it correctly. That way we're totally fine. We don't have to have any worries. And if it comes up later that maybe it wasn't properly licensed, dealt with on an ad hoc basis. But the message should be clear that when you're working with tools and programs, make sure that you have the right rights. That sounds bad, but like the correct rights in order to be able to use it for what you need to use it for.
Okay. And what made you get into the legal side, doing the sort of work you do? And then on top of that, why a video games company? Because again, even though you're like literally any company, once it gets to a certain size, they start to have, in-house counsel or they're consulting lawyers on a regular basis. Video games companies are are probably the last set of companies that you think of when you're talking about lawyers, for example. So, what made you get into the video gaming industry?
Yeah. So when I was in undergrad, as we all do in undergrad, well, maybe not all of us, but many of us, we're lost and we're trying to figure out what we actually want to do with our lives. It's a big question to ask for, to figure out in 4 years. So when I started there, I started off with political science thinking and international relations, thinking I'd be a diplomat for some reason. And then it found out I didn't really like that as I went on. But I already had that political science background, and it made it really easy for me to be like, you know what? I, you know, my I do find it important to mention that my parents both immigrated from Cuba, and that does have an effect because it made it so that they want me to be very successful. They want me to, use all the opportunities that I was granted here in America that they didn't have over in Cuba. So I felt like I had to choose, one of the big three graduate. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I wasn't particularly good at math, so I went with lawyer. And so once I did that, and once I made that choice to go lawyer, that like segues into your other question because it's like, okay, gonna be a lawyer, and why do I want to be a lawyer? I felt like I had to find my reason why. And at the time I was cosplaying. So I was creating cosplay creations of the characters that I really liked from anime, from video games, just a whole wide swath of it. And there were many instances where people were reposting my work and my costumes and uh either downloading it and just posting it as their own. And it was messed up because I had spent, all that time on not only the costume, but on getting the pictures taken and done. And then for somebody to come by and just repost it without my consent or do it without credit or anything like that, it felt very deeply uncomfortable. So the plight of the artist, I guess, this happens to artists all around. It's not just me. It happens to people who do digital art, people who do photography. Like it's a widespread issue now. And I figured, what? I want to stop this from happening. I want to do my part to stop this from happening because I hate it when it happens to me. So I went to law school wanting to represent artists and protect their work, have them find ways to protect their IP. And that's what naturally led me over time into the video game sphere because I needed to figure out what I was going to do after law school. And turns out that my passion was video games. It was all along, even though I kind of stifled it for a little bit because the crazy rush of the first year of law school and everything was a lot. But after I came to, I reconnected with my passion and I was like, I want to work in video games. I'm going to do everything I can to both work in video games and do what I came to law school for. Because, yeah, school loans are a thing and it feels bad to not do the thing that you went to school for. So that's basically what put me on this video game law journey. I hustled really, really, really hard in order to get the job that I have now. Because for me, I absolutely put my eggs in this basket, but it wasn't an option for me to not get a job like this. But that's because of personal circumstances. If other people might see it differently. But I'm just, yeah, very grateful to be where I am today and working with the devs. I'm representing the artists that I intended to represent back when I was in the beginning of law school. It's just I'm working at a company to do it. So it's really great.
So, you're actually working on your own game as well in Unreal Engine. So you're still using that creative side that you have. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about the game that you're working on?
Oh my god, of course. That was such a big stress reliever for the year and a half that I had been working on it. It's called Zoomy Dash, and it's really cute. It is a first person little run around game where you are a dog, my dog, and you run around and try and collect all the toys before mom gets home. So the idea behind all of that was when I was not when I was at Gearbox a couple of years ago, I was talking to one of the educational directors on the board, and I said that I wanted to learn game dev. I wanted to learn how to use the engine so that I could better understand how the devs were approaching their work. So I could better understand what is the kind of work that they do and how does legal intertwine with it. So initially it started off with just me trying to understand the tech so that I could offer my services as best as possible. But then it turned into a love and a passion for game design that I never knew I had. And I then I went to GDC that same year and I bought way too many books, very, very heavy suitcase. And one of them was The Art of Game Design. And I fell in love with that book so much. And it was just such a cool experience to be able to express myself creatively through this game that was used as a project for me to better learn Unreal Engine. But it ended up becoming something that like I'm very proud of. And I finished it earlier this year, late last year rather. And it's in a done state. Obviously it's in version 1, so I'm still going to be playtesting it myself. I'm actually really excited to take it to GDC this year in order to have other people playtest it and just, tell me what they think about it, how it can be improved for next time, and all sorts of things, so that when I eventually get back into the groove of working on the game, I'll have lots of good feedback. But that process has shown me so much about just game development in general, and how you have to iterate, and how you think you have an idea when you have it written down on paper, but then when you go to execute it, it doesn't exactly play out that way. So you got to adapt and be flexible and find different ways to solve problems, because there were many times that I was working on that game that I was just like almost ripping my hair out because I couldn't make a certain thing in Blueprint work properly. And then eventually, either through YouTubing the solution or Googling it or asking my Unreal teacher, his name is Jason, through asking them, I could find an answer to the question and finally figure it out. But it did so much for me learning Unreal Engine and the process of like creating a game from scratch, that I highly recommend it to like any lawyer that can get their hands on it, because it was a great way for me to understand what exactly are the pain points in game development and where does legal step in. And it might not be often in the actual like development process, but I could now see places where, okay, they might have a question about this or they might be wondering about that.
Okay, so it sounds like you're very passionate about that side that you're working on now. Do you ever foresee it being a scenario where you come back on the podcast in a year or two and now you're a game dev instead of a lawyer now? Like, has
Oh,
that at any
yeah.
point crossed your mind that this might be something I want to do as the main thing, and the legal side can be it might just sort of prop it up, and I can come at it from a legal perspective, but I might want to actually become a dev now.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had those thoughts. Not gonna lie, it's curious because I know that there is a creative inside of me. I think that that's part of the reason why I gravitated towards the video game industry. It's because yes, I used to cosplay, but I also used to write. In undergrad, after I finished the political science degree and a couple of other stuff, I still had 2 years left. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do something that I like a lot, and that's writing. So for as long as I can remember, I've been a creative writer and I focused on short stories and novels, but like game design is another flavor of that, especially narrative design. And that's something that I'm so curious and interested in. I got a little taste of it when I got to take the writer's test for Gearbox, just for my own edification, to know like what would it actually take in order to get a writing job or a narrative job at a video game company. And I absolutely love the process, having to do mission dialogue or like voiceover dialogue, creating a character, creating a backstory for that character, really letting your imagination go free and just flow. and see what comes out of it was so fun. So if I do come back on this podcast in a year and I'm either a game dev or like a writer or whatever it is, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, I did it initially in order to understand every facet of the game industry. So it wasn't just learning Unreal and that's it. It was learning Unreal because I want to know what the developers work on, the level designers and the coders and all that. I also did the writer's test because I want to know what narrative looks like. What kind of like, issues might they run into that they need me for. The next stop would have been, I did mocap for a while. So I got to experience what motion capture acting is like. And it was a lot of fun. Because, tidbit of information, I also did a minor in theater when I was in undergrad. So I know I have that creative spark in me, and it's the way that I express it. So I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps I even continue to be a lawyer and then do some other stuff on the side, either a game or a story. I don't know, something. But don't be surprised.
Okay, so it's something that maybe in the future you might expand more into, possibly. I mean,
Absolutely.
have you had any discussions with the teams over at Gearbox about maybe having some more involvement there?
Um, Thankfully, they are at capacity for what they need to do. So I think that Gearbox is very smart about their hires a lot of the time, in terms of like getting the right amount of people for the job. So I would, if a spot ever opens, I might consider it. But I just appreciate that I can work so well with these teams now that I have had the opportunity to try these things out. So getting a better understanding of what like the narrative team does at Gearbox only helped me understand how I can help them better when they come to me asking, "Oh, can you vet this name and make sure that it's okay to use it in the game and there won't be any legal issues associated?"
So you go to GDC pretty often, don't you? You go every year? Do you go?
I have been going since 2019. The only year that I wasn't a CA was 2020 because they didn't have the conference because of COVID. But it is one of those things that I am so excited to go to every single year. And I'm super excited this year because I'm actually taking a bit of a quote break in how I approach GDC. A lot of people go to GDC and they, do whatever they do with their time with it. Every time that I've gone to GDC, I have gone with the mission of networking and I've gone with the mission of meeting as many people as I can. And that's pretty much how you do GDC productively. Like you make the meetings ahead of time, you go to party, not necessarily parties, but you go to mixers, for example. You can go to parties. It's just a little louder to be networking. But there's ways to go to GDC and be really productive about it. But if I'm going to be completely honest, this year I'm going and I'm trying to just enjoy the conference for what it is. I'm still volunteering and working the conference as a what's called conference associate. So I'm going to be dedicating hours during the week to making sure that the conference runs smoothly and doing whatever they need to make the attendees smile and have a good time and all that. But in my off time, I want to go to panels and I want to explore the show floor and just, do things that really enrich my knowledge of the game industry.
Okay, so you said you spoke about meetings there, and make scheduling them ahead of time. Well, like how do you create those meetings? Like, is there some sort of website, or like, how do you reach out to people and organizations to make those meetings? Is it through prior contacts that you have, or like what's the situation?
Yeah. So GDC is a nonstop week, and most people who are going there, well, I won't say most, a lot of people who are going there have an objective in mind. They have a mission in mind. They are either trying to sell their product, or they're trying to meet other people, they're trying to get a job in the game industry, they're trying to shop their game to different publishers. There's a million different reasons why you might want to go to GDC. But when it comes to actually meeting with the people you want to meet up with, their schedules by the time you get to GDC are already filled up probably. That happened to me last year. But right before GDC, I had to put out a post. I was like, "All right, I'm all booked up. Every single ounce of free time that I had at that conference was booked in meeting people, either, having a formal meeting or going to an event that I was invited to, going to an event that I was invited to speak at, for example." So and last year I was also working for Gearbox at the same time. So there was very little free time. It was extremely productive. So absolutely recommend reaching out to those people you want to talk to ahead of time and see if they're free and available and schedule those ahead of time. I've had multiple people already reach out this year asking me, hey, can we get lunch? Can we do this? Can we do that? And my thing is that it's contingent on my work schedule for the volunteering for the conference, but um there's always pockets of time. Sometimes people cancel, sometimes people can't make it. Sometimes people get what's called con crud, where they just get sick either during or after the conference. So I think it's really important to set up those meetings ahead of time. And if you're there and you happen to see somebody that you've been wanting to talk to, trying to get their attention while being respectful and polite about it is another good way to do it. And if you can't get a meeting with them there, at least exchange contact information. One of the really like cool networking tips that I had last year was that on my phone lock screen, I pulled the QR code that LinkedIn creates for you, and I set that as the background or the wallpaper on my phone, so that whenever somebody wanted to connect with me, I would literally just flash my phone, they would scan it with their camera, and then boom, they can add me on LinkedIn and we can follow up there. So if you're gonna go that route, which is I just thought it was so genius when I saw somebody else do it. But if you're gonna go that route, definitely follow up, because it's so easy to forget a face, forget a name, and all the people that you're gonna meet or the people do meet at GDC.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's some good advice. I mean, I'd say just in life in general is follow up, follow up, follow up. I definitely know
Yeah,
just with this podcast, when I'm reaching out to people like yourself on LinkedIn, like obviously, first of all, you gotta get that connection and get the other person to respond. But once they respond, follow up as well. Like
yeah,
you might the person might be busy at that at a particular moment, go back to them 2, 3 months later. It's not a matter of like message them 5 times in a week, but use a calendar, put it in your calendar, and follow up, and also make sure that you follow up just to make sure they haven't forgotten even, because just
yeah,
because you've put it in your calendar, you're on top of it. They might not be, because like
right.
I think yesterday, this week, I did messaging, all good for this podcast, just to make sure, because I know it's literally happened to me before where I've scheduled a podcast and I'm like, okay, I've got in my calendar, I know I'm going to be there at that time, and then there's times where the guest has just totally forgot, like they haven't put it in their calendar and they've just relied on their memory to remember, and they've just scheduled something in at the same time and they're busy now. So yeah, definitely following up, and yeah, for conferences when you're trying to organize meetings, follow up, and they might be busy at that moment, but obviously that's not a problem, and you can just follow up afterwards.
Yeah,
But
no, 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 absolutely. And I'm thinking of like what you just said about putting it in your calendar. That's something that a skill that I've had to learn hardcore, where it's like if you want to make time for it, put it in your calendar immediately, or else with all the busyness and craziness of life, you're probably going to forget. The calendar is such a helpful tool.
Oh yeah, because it's that one thing you can just open anytime and be like, do I have something
Mhm.
at this time, or do I have something in general coming up? Because
Yeah.
if you look at it, and let's say if you're strict and you're always putting it on the calendar, if you look at it and you think, okay, I've got nothing between these hours on this particular day, that's fine. Or you look at it and be like, oh, I've got this and this event today. I forgot about it. Sometimes it's an event that you may have, organized 6 months, a year prior. It is so easy to forget those events, so definitely utilize a calendar. Obviously something that you can easily use on your phone. It might be a third party application, but ideally that links in with your email address as well. And but yeah, like it's something that does make it very convenient for you to be able to on the go utilize it. But I did like that tip that you learned from someone else about the QR LinkedIn code. I think that's a
Yes.
real great networking tip, something that you can be like, okay, just scan, because everyone has a phone
Yep.
that has a camera that can scan QR code. And if you just be like, yeah, just scan this, takes you to the LinkedIn, instead of trying to exchange numbers or trying to exchange
Right.
email addresses, and then the email being wrong, or
I
etc
know.
etc.
One wrong
You,
typo. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So definitely, having that little tip, it's something that I've never used in any networking capacity, but it's definitely something I'm gonna utilize going forward. Because again,
Yeah.
LinkedIn is that professional social network. Because it's also that other thing, like if you say, "Oh, add me on LinkedIn," people are less hesitant than, if you say, "Oh, add me on Facebook," for example,
Yeah, yeah,
or I don't know, or,
yeah.
if you're using one of the other more modern social networks like TikTok or Instagram, people are like, "Do I really want to be adding you in a professional capacity on Instagram?" But
Right.
LinkedIn, everyone's like, "Yeah, that's fine."
It's that's so big because when I had first started out like networking and doing my hustle in 2019, LinkedIn wasn't as prolific as it is now. So I was actually more on Instagram and Twitter and trying to make a name for myself on both of those platforms. And I gotta admit, at some point there were times when I was like, I feel like there's a merging of personal and professional here that like I
Mm.
wish there was an option for it to just be professional, like a platform that was just dedicated to like the professional persona of myself. We all have it, so I'm really glad now that people have LinkedIn and that it's become the platform that it is because it absolutely serves that purpose and that niche.
Oh yeah, I feel like over the last 2 years, it sounds like you've noticed it as well. That I've heavily noticed that it's become like another alternative social
Yeah.
network. You've seen so many people like, let's say call them rock stars of just like LinkedIn, and like they don't have YouTube in any major way. They don't have Twitter in any major way. Like they might happen to have an account, but they're not active on that or any of the other
Yeah.
platforms like Instagram as well. It's LinkedIn, and there's so many people within the gaming industry as well. You got Amir Satva, Ida Figueroa, and there's like so many other ones as well.
Right.
Like I feel like LinkedIn's in the next 12 to 24 months gonna start doing some sort of monetization in a way that it's more like a traditional social network, because we are getting people on here with tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of followers and loyal fans now, where they're getting like tens, hundreds of thousands and millions of views across their posts. So it is like having an Instagram page or having a YouTube channel.
Yeah. No, 100%. I'm really grateful that LinkedIn has evolved the way that it has. It's a really easy way to see my accolades and accomplishments in the professional sphere in a way that just doesn't really make sense in Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or like Twitter, any of the other social media platforms. So 100%, I think that people who want to enter the games industry should have a fully filled out LinkedIn that's accurate and updated to the day. And I think that it provides a lot of good opportunities to just meet the people that you want to meet, mentorship, finding people that are in your space that you might want to learn more information about that space. You can follow people now on LinkedIn, so that's really great. You don't really necessarily have to be connected to them in order to ingest their content. And sometimes their content can be so useful for people. So it's really opened up a new vertical, and I'm really glad that it's out there.
Oh yeah, what LinkedIn has done. Plus, like you're saying, it allows you to showcase your accolade and what you've achieved, but in a way that if you do it on Facebook or Instagram, it feels like you're showing off. Like you feel
Yeah.
like people are showing off. Whereas on LinkedIn, if you do it right, you can do it in a way that it just feels like, oh, somebody's just posting an update, or
Yeah.
this person's just won this award, or they've got this new job, for example, or they just because you can put publications in as well. So you can put if you just released, let's say if you released a book on game design, where game design meets the legal side, you could put that on there, and there's like a specific section to be able to publicize that on your LinkedIn page. Whereas if you put it on Facebook, it does feel like, oh, somebody's just showing off that they just released a book. So yeah, it does feel less showy offy
Yeah.
for the professional side.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've also started recently at the University of Miami. What are you doing there, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so I am currently teaching a video game law and business class in the undergraduate and graduate schools in the School of Communication at the University of Miami. And it's been a very, very, very big learning experience and very rewarding in some ways and can be frustrating in some other ways, but it's all part of the process, right? So, what we're teaching, I'm co teaching it along with David Greenspan, who authored the World Intellectual Property Review or Organization book on and well, basically legal and business for game devs. So we are basically teaching the students exactly what they need to know, like the most fundamental foundational stuff regarding the business and legal of the game industry. So we have a whole mix of students in that class, ranging from those who don't particularly know what Twitch is to those who play Overwatch every day. And it's such a great spread because it really helps me see, wow, there are a lot of people who just don't know the game industry. I feel like sometimes we become so engrossed in the game industry that we fail to look outside of it and be like, there's so many other industries in this world that have nothing to do with games, and they're coming from completely different perspectives, and that's why their perspectives are so much more valuable, because they're different than what you commonly see on LinkedIn or other platforms regarding the games industry. So it's been a very great learning experience so far, dealing with the students, and being able to teach them in a way that's digestible. Because, yeah, some of these topics, especially the legal ones, are heavy and dense. I get it. I went through law school for it. Like, yeah, we spent a whole semester on contracts, whereas in the class, we're spending a couple of days on contracts, right? So it's difficult to like make everything fit in a digestible way for the grads and undergrads, but absolutely we're figuring out a way to teach them the foundational so that they're equipped when they go out into the game industry with everything they need to know, not just, the creative skills, but also some of the harder skills when it comes to, just having knowledge of business and legal in the industry.
Okay, I think that that definitely is really cool because you know, like we've already alluded to, when you think of law, you don't think of the video game industry, and when you think of the game industry, you don't think of the legal side. So
Right.
you have that not just obviously in the work environment, but before you get there, in education at the university, so people can actually learn about that. And obviously there'll be differences, to being a lawyer within the video games industry for a company like Gearbox versus a traditional corporate firm. There's going to be a lot of difference, especially when there is the creative side, when you are creating products that people are constantly playing and potentially for years and years, and then you're doing updates as well. I feel, I'm
Yeah.
sure there'll be, legal ramifications of that versus, you know, Nike making trainers, for example, that once that particular trainer is on your foot, it's not getting updates. Like,
Right.
it is that whether they've, made it right or not, the shoe that the footwear that you have, that's it. Whereas with a game, there's so many other, potential ramifications. And as, things are changing in the political and then also in the, sphere, and then also in the video game sphere in general as well. So I understand, Vida, you have to wrap up today. So we're gonna wrap up the podcast today, due to time constraints. Love to have you on again because we've already discussed a fair few amazing topics, but there's still a lot more I feel like to uncover, especially considering don't really get many people from the legal side on the podcast. It is usually artists and programmers for the most part. But before we do wrap up, just two questions. What's your favorite Gearbox game, and what's your favorite game in general?
I like that question. My favorite Gearbox game is hands down Borderlands 2.
Okay.
Love that game to death. It's what helped me to play with other people in a group setting for the first time, not in person. So like LAN party vibes. That was a lot of fun back then. And then my favorite game outside of Gearbox, I always swap and flip between Portal because I love Portal so much. Just
One or two?
genre breaking. I know it's so good. And Street Fighter, because there's something about martial arts and just fighting games in general that really amp me up and get me excited and pumped to like go for the day. So, and Chun Li's my favorite character ever. But yeah, those are the two that I would say.
Okay. And for Portal, which one or two, or is it just Portal in general, the series?
In general, the series, but one, because the cake is a lie, still stays with me to
Yes,
this day.
I
Yes.
still remember where I was sitting at my parents' house and playing that game, and
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah, at the end, the cake is. I remember just thinking about it for the rest of
Yeah.
the day, and still to this day, sometimes I'll see like a chocolate,
I
cake that kind of
know.
looks similar, and I'm just like, cake is
It's
a
a
lie.
lie.
Sometimes I've even said it to someone around me, like my wife
Exactly.
or someone else, and they won't get the reference.
Yeah,
Nah, I
absolutely.
definitely do want to get a cake. Again, it's not a complex cake, but like a cake, with that,
Yeah.
the exact look. Actually, I'm gonna ask because my wife always gets me a cake every year for my birthday. And on
Oh,
my upcoming birthday at the end of the year, I'm gonna get the Porto cake.
Are you
cake is a
sure?
lie,
What if
and
it's a
I'm gonna
lie?
put something inside about the cake
Yeah.
is a lie as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be even funnier is if the outside the cake and the inside is just hollow cardboard.
It's just
You know,
hollow. That would happen. GLaDOS would absolutely do that.
oh yeah, 100%, and then make the chocolate not real chocolate either. Make it
Oh,
something else.
no. Like, chocolate chip cookies that are actually raisin cookies. It's like the
Oh
lie, the biggest lie of all.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that would definitely happen. So yeah, appreciate you coming on the podcast today, Vida, and it's great to have someone again from a different side of the video games industry, but just equally as important, and then sometimes even more important because it can, especially for the bigger studios, it can be like make or break.
Yeah,
Especially once there's been potentially millions of man hours being put into a title. Last thing you want to do is get sued by some other studio because you've infringed on their
right.
copyright.
Right. No one likes that.
No. So appreciate you coming on, and I want to thank everyone for tuning into this week's episode of FireDEV. Thanks for listening, and see everyone next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.